Whoever imagined that sex toys would provide us with such a fertile ground for NLP development? I have here the new code plug. This is, if we want to make an analogy, somewhere between a metaphor and analogy, if this is new technology NLP as opposed to old technology NLP, the new technology NLP comes with a little charger box here. It's very nice. This is actually an extremely professional Mettler TENS unit, and thanks to the very entrepreneurial sensibilities of the folks in the Netherlands, they've made this completely compatible with this this insertable device, which has two conductive layers there. I actually find, for my own use, that this turned out to be a fantastically good device. You couldn't actually order or invent a more useful device for hand rehabilitation. So what I do with this thing is I hold it in my hand, and this is to help rebuild finger strength, because I believe I had a compressed nerve, some kind of impingement of my vertebra on the nerve, and I was definitely experiencing a loss of hand strength and arm strength. And all the regular TENS pads and all these little things that you could buy from the therapy supply places just didn't work nearly as well as the Rimba large insertable device. The sensation's rather interesting. I'm turning this thing on. It runs on 9-volt batteries. It's quite convenient that way. And so I'm going to run this up to about, I don't know, I've got this at about 14 to 15 milliamps. It varies a little bit on your hand placement. And there is a fascinating, marvelous, just right kind of pulse, electrical pulse, kind of a snapping pop kind of pulse, which is teaching my finger muscles and nerves to relearn their contraction. It's really something. You can set it at various frequencies depending on the frequency you want. You can set it on different types of modalities. You can types of power, width of the pulse. This is 6 hertz, and 6 hertz I think is probably the upper end of what one would be using for, say, erotic purposes. Not that I would contemplate using this for such purposes, or not. However, yes, this thing can be inserted in various orifices. That's what it's intended for. That was the original engineering, was to go into the orifice of choice. I'll turn that off now so we can discuss it a little more objectively. As far as auditory mapping goes, auditory signal, which isn't really auditory in this case, you can attach this to the amplifier terminals. If you take this wire, and you have to carefully cut it off and split the wire and attach a few spade lugs to it so it can be attached to an audio amplifier, this device will also act as a conductive contact for audio signals. A certain number of aficionados of exotic sensations swear by this form of electrosex, where they take the Rimba or similar conductive plug, attach it to the stereo system, and crank it. According to them, according to their literature, I have never personally tested this, so I cannot act as an unimpeachable source of information. But according to the fan base that does enjoy this form of stimulation, Johnny Mathis is the most exquisitely pleasurable sounds. Apparently the singing of Johnny Mathis put through a powerful audio amplifier run through these wires and inserted wherever will give you something like a direct auditory, in a sense, auditory signal directly to kinesthetic, very profound kinesthetic sense of connection. One can also imagine something like this being used for gaming, maybe gaming signals, and for the real sort of multimedia experience. You know, we have the surround sound at home theater, but if you really wanted the home theater experience in its fullest form, you could actually have audio amplifiers going to speakers, and simultaneously you would have to induce a brief delay. You would need a delay line to synchronize the signals exactly, but you could actually have the auditory signal directly routed to some internal part of your body via the Rimba device, and you would also have to use, I suppose, some electrostimulation gel here as a lubricant. Sense the sound, and if you had independent volume controls, of course, which would be the desirable thing, you could adjust it accordingly. So you could fully connect kinesthetic and auditory experiences as a fully unified sensoria, a fully unified input of information. Or you could just use this thing as a rehabilitative hand strengthener, which actually has helped me quite a bit, as well as using squeeze balls and things like that. But yes, there are ways that we can map. And when I did the butt plug video, of course, if you noticed, if you thought about what was happening, there was a great deal, I assume, of visual to kinesthetic. Okay, so we had a lot of V to K, and a lot of what that was about in its own rather non-traditional way of expressing that was getting a strong VK mapping going on between sort of, and especially V associated with a lot of sort of auditory digital, AD, auditory digital, and V together, books, markers, all that stuff. That's sort of an AD-V cluster of stuff, and which typically the AD and V, which is kind of where you're at with school, where you're at looking at blackboards and things like that, doesn't often map very strongly or directly over to K, you know, very personal, strong, intense senses of kinesthesia, so, and proprioceptive kinesthesia. So a lot of what that was about, if you're wondering what in the hell is this guy talking about, was about the mapping of sensation, the mapping of sort of a more abstract intellectual process, and suggesting that mapping over to a very distinct, significant, calibratable physical kinesthesia. And with this, of course, you could also imagine going instead of the visual, necessarily the visual and the auditory digital, you could go from the auditory, I guess you would call it sort of the right hemisphere auditory musical, which is another realm of experience, quite a different realm of experience. And if any of you are fans of certain drugs, you will know that they can very, very much affect your response, your probably right hemisphere response to musicality. And so here we have a different sort of mapping process. And it's just one heck of a good rehabilitative tool as well, if that's what you need. And probably could add some interesting, how does one put this, interesting spin on your love life, if that's what you're interested in doing. The little Mettler job here is the Mettler Trio Stem. They're rather costly. It's because you have to buy them from medical places. I recommend, if you're doing this stuff, as much as possible, use like legitimate medical TENS units. They sell these charger boxes and these things, and from what I've seen, they seem like they're kind of overpriced and of quite questionable quality, where you buy something that's a legitimate medical device. You know, it's made to rigorous standards. So think about that. Think about these mappings from various internals, externals, auditory, digital, visual, kinesthetic, auditory, musical, kinesthetic, where else in your body might you feel these sensations that you're not familiar with? What would feeling these sensations in a new part of your body do for your entire reaction to the data? So how do we say? Play with that, man.